Yeah, we're off. Bye, guys.
This incredible new telescope lens is taking over the market in Australia. See everything from miles away with this powerful Australian.
And Edgewood Arsenal, Pure Rich, Dulles. I mean,
This is a view from the bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
From Mount Herman to Skinwalker Ranch, something strange is going on out there and has been for a very long time. Welcome to a view from the bunker.
Yeah, Diane, I've been taking a lot down. I want to leave a couple of videos up to keep people sort of who don't join us live just a little bit interested. And I said something in the last one that would have got me a community strike because I watched these guys from prison tell their stories, and they got to be careful how they word certain words because they actually will ban you just for what you say out loud. And I think that's why I get a community strike on my channels when I got it off YouTube, and they're still up there because I said something stupid.
I'm Derek Gilbert. Please take a moment if you're watching on YouTube. God bless you. Click the bell, subscribe.
I gotta go check it out.
We never get canceled by downloading our free mobile app that's available for iOS, Android, and Amazon Kindle Fire phones and tablets. Why? Because the content comes directly to you, does not go through gatekeepers. We will not be canceled from our own app. And so you'll find that tool to fight back against the censors of the internet at gilberthouse.org/app. You'll also find it at vftb.net. Look in the top menu bar for the link. Joining us is a gentleman we've known for quite some time, and we've exchanged.
Hi, Shawnee. Welcome back. I just checked Skype, and they've signed me out again, and I got to sign back in. I don't know how to do that. Gabe's down seeing her mother. She's coming back in the morning, so I can't do anything from Skype. I can't even reply to you guys.
Research information back and forth over the years. We are proud to consider him our friend, and he has just released his first documentary film. This is under the banner of Truth Seekers Research, and there'll be a link in the notes to where you can watch this, stream it at vimeo.com. Really, this connects a lot of dots, ties together a lot of things, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it's connecting everything from Mount Herman to Skinwalkers Ranch. The film is called Skinwalkers and Stranger Things of the Unseen Realm, and we are honored to welcome filmmaker Chad Riley to the program. Chad, it's good to see you again, brother.
It's good to see you too, brother. It's always an honor.
This is a very wide-ranging film, about 2 hours and 30 minutes, but there's never a section in it where I felt like things were dragging, like it was being padded. You put a lot of research, a lot of information in here. Again, everything from the Watchers Rebellion, the Genesis 6 worldview, through the present-day UFO phenomenon. That's a big topic to tackle. Why did you try doing this for your first film?
Well, actually, I started out to do a film on Skinwalker Ranch, but my research quickly led me into remote viewing. The remote viewing led me into a lot of the government programs, mainly through the CIA, one branch called MK Often, which got into the supernatural and satanic rituals, and Edgewood Arsenal, Pure Rich, Dulles. I mean, it quickly spiraled out of control, and it was about 480 pages of notes, and I had to whittle it down to about 88 pages for the script.
Yeah, I was going to say, with all that, how did you manage to keep it just 2.5 hours?
Yeah, I had to whittle it down and just kind of cherry pick what I felt really needed to be in there, what was the crux of the matter, and just tie it all together.
Well, when you're starting with Skinwalkers Ranch, which viewers, I assume, are somewhat familiar with, a place in Utah where anomalous paranormal things have been reported for some time now. There, I don't know how many series of a special, how many seasons of a series on probably History Channel. I forget which network carries it, that deals exclusively with the research at Skinwalkers. Right, 4 seasons. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So if you're going to look at something in the present day that is currently being investigated by paranormal researchers, it attracted a lot of attention.
Hey, Phil, good to
why
see you,
go all
bro.
the way back to the distant pre-flood past and start with Mount Hermon?
Well, I mean, even the Skinwalker Ranch area, the whole Uintah Basin area, it goes all the way back to 1776 when a Franciscan monk was out there in that area and reported 3 fireballs flying around in the sky. So it actually, that whole area goes way back, and the Native Americans talk about it, I think, up to almost 20 generations. Yeah, that whole area, and then even the Great Witch Purge of 1878. I mean, it's a lot of phenomenal history in that area. But yeah, the Mount Hermon connection for sure. Just that whole temple, the Kasar Antar, and the goodness, the gentleman's name is eluding me. The one that made the discovery,
Sir Charles Warren.
who was actually. Yes, Sir Charles Warren, who was actually the police chief during the Jack the Ripper murders.
Right.
I thought, yeah, that was very fascinating as well. So
I guess another way of phrasing the question then is, since the secular research of the type people would get on the History Channel focuses on extraterrestrial or other sorts of paranormal activity, how do you then connect it to the Bible and to these entities
No
well known
way.
to the Jews of the Second Temple period, which was when the Book of First Enoch was written, that really expands on that the 4 short verses in Genesis chapter 6.
Wow, Di, that's pretty stunning.
To explain what that whole thing was about and why those sinful angels, according to Peter and Jude, are now in the abyss, in chains, in gloomy darkness. Peter even specifies they're in Tartarus, which in the Greek mind was as far below Hades as the earth is below heaven. I mean, this is like double secret probation. Why connect it to the angelic realm when all of these other researchers are looking for, extraterrestrial connections?
Well, I guess the thing that actually got me to approach it from the aspect that you're talking about would be the hitchhiker effect. Because once I started researching the hitchhiker effect, that's what led me into remote viewing, and even took it all the way back to 1947 with Kenneth Arnold, because Kenneth Arnold was the first person who, as far as I was able to document, was the first person who encountered the hitchhiker effect. After he saw the 9 craft over Mount Rainier in Washington, his daughter came out later and talked about this on interviews, but also in his book, he wrote about poltergeist activity occurring in the house after that incursion, and that they saw orbs, craft, and things around the house, just all sorts of bizarre things. And then you look into the remote viewing aspect. The remote viewers were also some of the very early pioneers who were encountering the hitchhiker effect phenomenon. Uri Geller, for example, when they were testing Uri Geller out, a lot of the scientists that were researching him were having, demonic activity taking place in their homes as well. So that's where, it's like when you really look into this, you see that there's a connection to all these, and it has to do with this hitchhiker effect phenomenon that is well known out there at Skinwalker Ranch. In fact, in the film, I have the clip that Travis Taylor, who's part of the TV show, who comes right out and says that the reason why Bigelow got rid of the ranch is that he believed that it was the ranch that killed his wife. In fact, I've even heard so far as that he not only believes it killed his wife, but he also believes that it also killed his son.
Huh. Just to make sure we're clear, the hitchhiker effect, meaning that by investigating something or seeing something and then talking about it publicly, something attaches itself to you, your family, your property. Is that right?
Yes, we see that people who have encounters with certain individuals or certain geographic locations, that if you go out there, it doesn't necessarily affect you. But when you go back home to your house or, wherever your family resides, that they begin to see things. There's things that start taking place in the home. They talk about shadow people, dogmen, orbs, UFO, even aliens walking around the home. So, I mean, just bizarre, insane situations.
Stanford Research Institute, which was involved in the remote viewing Project Stargate, project, was it Grow Flame? Was another one, if I remember right. Hal Puthoff, who was part of the group that released.
Shawnee, I think these Skinwalker ranches, I think they're on ley lines and things like that. I'm not sure, but I think
in December of 2017 to the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences. With the exception of the CEO, Tom DeLonge, the former lead guitarist and vocalist for Blink-182, everyone else on the board of directors for that organization was connected to the military intelligence complex. And Puthoff was directly responsible or involved with, integral to the remote viewing at Stanford Research Institute. If I remember correctly, getting back to the hitchhiker effect, the researchers at Stanford Research Institute started seeing things in their homes, did they not?
Yes. In fact, what you were talking about, Hal Puthoff just now, Hal was also a member of Scientology. That's the thing. And it's another one of those aha, eureka moments when I started looking at this, because him and Ingo Swann were both OT7s. Pat Price, who was their golden boy, he was an OT3. So it's like, what did they glean out of Scientology? And you know where I'm going with this, because you know who started Scientology.
Right.
It's like yeah. So that's where a lot of the techniques that they use for remote viewing came from, was Scientology.
Now that I did not know.
And he's also part of NIDS, which ties him directly out of Skinwalker Ranch.
NIDS, which is the National Institute of Discovery Science.
Yep.
And that was Robert Bigelow. Robert Bigelow founded and funded that, and he was the friend of former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, which is how the funding was allocated to the Pentagon to look into what was going on at Skinwalker Ranch, and how, there's a very incestuous group of connections in there. But I want to get back to the remote viewing Scientology connection, because you mentioned, who founded it, and of course we need to make clear for viewers and listeners not familiar that was L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, who was also a friend and colleague of Jack Parsons, who founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and both of them were devotees of Aleister Crowley.
Mm-hmm. And another interesting thing about Jack Parsons was that the Jehovah's Witnesses, was that John Taze Russell, the founder, had made an end times prediction that the end of the world would begin on October 2nd, 1912. Well, that just happened to be the date that Jack Parsons was born. And he referred to himself as the Antichrist. Oh, yeah. Yeah, he referred to himself as the Antichrist. And, that Crowley referred to himself as the Great Beast 666.
Right.
And that was his understudy. So
Crowley was not too happy with the Babylon working that Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard undertook in the desert, as I understand it, that he felt they were messing with forces that were beyond their control. How did the course of Parsons and Hubbard's lives play out, and what do you think?
I know that they supposedly took the Alma Lantra working and tweaked it, and that's what they were referring to as the Babylon working ritual. And I know that it took place between the years 1945 through 1946, if I remember correctly, and that the last time that they performed it, supposedly they were successful. In fact, I believe it was L. Ron Hubbard who had made the prediction that thou shalt become the living sacrifice by flame, or something along those lines, which just happened to be very prophetic since he happened to blow himself up. But I've even heard people say that, I've even heard people say that that there wasn't chemicals and things like that found whenever they arrived on the scene. That they said it looked like he was performing some sort of a ritual, and that he had all sorts of occult things in the room with him when he blew himself up. So I mean, again, and you know, not even just that, but even some.
Diane, I haven't got time to watch them movies. I just don't bother watching them. I used to like them when I was a young bloke, but I just haven't got time to watch horror movies. And they're rather childish sometimes.
The connections that you really start to see there, because there was a researcher who had gone on a radio show and brought to light the fact that Parsons and was it Parsons, Goddard, and Kenneth Arnold, all three knew one another. That Kenneth Arnold and Jack Parsons were flying buddies, supposedly. And not only that, but they had a mutual friend that lived in Roswell named Robert Goddard, who was also into rocket technology and was part of the. And in fact, he used to do his experiments out there at the exact same place that Jack Parsons and the Suicide Squad did all theirs, out at the Devil's Gate Dam. So again, you just keep seeing all these connections over and over and over, and they just overlap.
The connection then between the UFO phenomenon and the spirit realm, how does the hitchhiker phenomenon then convince you, or how does that manifest, I guess, with the UFO phenomenon to convince you that it's really a spiritual phenomenon rather than a extraterrestrial phenomenon?
A lot of it is by the
Good
fruits
question.
of what the witnesses are coming back and talking about, and things that they're telling you. The thing about them just morphing in and out of existence, like the shadow people, which we know about. I can't think of the one documentary, and there's several books, but they get into the thing about the shadow people who have the sleep paralysis.
Phil, wait till you see the crazy things on that channel about the cryptid animals you see on the camera trails. There's some really crazy stuff out there, and I don't know if they're bodgy, but they don't look bodgy. There's a few that do, but there's a lot of stunning chemtrails there.
Some things like that, and how when they call out in the name of Jesus, these things just immediately stop and come to an end. And even Joe Jordan, who through his CE4 research talked about that, when he worked through MUFON, or still does work at MUFON, he uncovered close to 700 cases where people have called out in the name of Jesus, and if they just called out, it stopped. But if they accepted Jesus as their Lord and Savior, it stopped permanently. So he shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is scientifically repeatable, and that there is hope. It's like you're not hopeless. That if you call out to Jesus and accept Him as your Lord and Savior, it's like, yes, you can put an end to this.
You showed a couple of clips featuring well-known researcher and broadcaster George Knapp, who we had the opportunity to meet back in 2018, one of the True Legends conferences hosted by Steve Quayle down in Branson. Nice guy, and he has made a career of, other than just serving as a weekend host on Coast to Coast AM, but on broadcast television in the Las Vegas market, digging into these stories of strange goings on at Area 51 and so on. He mentioned a book in a clip that you showed where he was talking to Joe Rogan on Joe Rogan's podcast about a book that I'd never heard before by William Bramley called The Gods of Eden. So is it only Christians like us who are looking at this phenomenon and saying, or rather, let me put it this way. How common is it becoming for secular researchers to come to the conclusion that the UFO phenomenon is really spiritual?
Well, that's the thing, is that a lot of them are getting there. Even people within the United States government are reaching the same results. In fact, the whole thing that with Jack Parsons, with a lot of the stuff that he was doing back when he worked for Howard Hughes, and how he got investigated, and the whole thing about what he was doing with L. Ron Hubbard, and they fully investigated him for a while, and they, their ultimate decision was that he had something to do with this whole UFO phenomenon, something that he and L. Ron Hubbard through something that somehow was associated with.
Yeah, I like fishing too.
Aleister Crowley, that they had all brought this about and kicked off this whole UFO wave. And so, I mean,
certainly the timing would be would fit in there, and Arnold, and then Roswell, and then Aztec, and a number of other phenomena or incidents that took place shortly after that in the late 1940s. Perhaps not coincidentally happening at the same time that Israel was becoming an independent nation again for the first time in almost 2,000 years. It is very interesting to note that researchers like Jacques Vallée, another secular researcher who I think is very well known for pointing out that the behavior of some of these craft is more akin to spirit beings moving in and out of our dimensions, interdimensional rather than extraterrestrial. In other words, they've not really developed a new sort of physics. It's just that they can move in more dimensions than we can perceive, and so it appears as though they're moving in other dimensions. The question, I guess, then is, why would these entities, assuming that this then, and I agree with you, by the way, that this is a spiritual phenomenon, why would they try to convince us that they are extraterrestrials from Zeta Reticuli or wherever?
Well, it's not just that they do not want people to know truly exactly who or what they are, but what their true purpose is. Like I said, the government a long time ago, they found out real quick, who and what these things are. Even back 1948, the FBI document 6751, they talked about these things were interdimensional, that they were coming from another dimension, and that they were larger in size. They weren't as tall as we are. They were much bigger and much taller. They even start talking about different esoteric terms in there, like the Talas and the Lokas, and because like a lot of the stuff that Kenneth Grant was talking about in his book Aleister Crowley and the Hidden God, when he's talking about a lot of the stuff, he got into the whole thing about the Kelipod or the Clippeth, or and even the Citra Aqua. And that was one of those things, because I believe it was the first time I had heard it, it was a researcher by the name of Freeman Fly who had talked about that book. And he said that somewhere in that book, it talks about the reason why NASA was created was to make contact with the other side. Well, I just thought that was an interesting term. And then, it's like I automatically took it that they were trying to make contact with the heavenly realms or demonic realms. But then when I found out about the Citra Aqua, and what I'm talking about, the Citra Aqua, another term or another name for it is called the other side. And this is a demonic realm that is supposedly ruled by 5 kings from Edom. And yeah, so it was one of those things. It's just like,
yeah, this is an area where you're more researched than I. This is not something I've dug into. 5 kings from Edom.
Mm-hmm. Very fascinating.
Huh. Okay. Did you dig into the book Final Events by Nick Redfern at all in the course of your research?
Yes, I've read that one years ago before we ever did Higher Entities.
Okay, right. That was the documentary that you did with Justin and Wes Fall several years ago. I was honored to be a part of that. In fact, I'm sitting inside a building that's about maybe 25 feet from where we shot my segment, right outside in the gravel driveway. I have to wonder about the conclusion that was reached by Redfern. Apparently, now he in his book, to his credit, he interviewed Dr. Mike Heiser. He interviewed Guy Malone. So he did get some Christian perspective on the phenomenon. But the idea that there is a group within the United States government that has concluded that this is a demonic manifestation, and I don't disagree with that, but the solution that they suggested, which was to bring the United States under Old Testament law, and that somehow that would protect us from these soul-sucking demonic UFOs. As you've dug further into your research and started putting these pieces together with Skinwalker Ranch and the occult workings of guys like Parsons and Hubbard and Kenneth Grant, who was Aleister Crowley's personal secretary, what is going on inside the government? How is the government processing this, and what kind of response have they put together?
Their biggest thing is to just stifle, and they don't want to talk about it. You hear people like Jeremy Corbell, George Knapp, and all these people that are trying to break this information and to get it out, how they can keep running into walls with certain people. And they've talked to like 3-star, 4-star generals, different people, and they say that every time they get to this point with them where they just kind of like say, look, I don't want to talk about this anymore. We know what these things are. We know that they're demonic. We know that they're evil. Just let it go.
I've said, yeah.
Mike Heiser may ask a really good question about this at some point. I mean, years ago. At some point, you would hope that the federal government would have access to better theologians. So, Chad, let's go back to a book we mentioned just a few minutes ago. This was the book George Knapp brought up in his interview with Joe Rogan, The Gods of Eden by William Bramley. Who was William Bramley? What was he trying to do with this book, and why did you see it necessary to bring into your documentary Skinwalkers and Stranger Things of the Unseen Realm?
Yeah, Bramley was a attorney that had been researching the causes behind war, and I believe he spent close to about 7 years researching that book. And he kept coming to this one conclusion, that there was some sort of unseen force that was driving humanity to war with one another, and that was deriving something out of it, that it was getting something out of us suffering and killing one another.
Yeah, I'm looking at the back cover. This book was published 30 years ago by HarperCollins, an imprint of HarperCollins, Avon Books. So this is not, some self-published, thing run up on a mimeograph. I mean, HarperCollins, major publishing house. The back cover copy reads, "They came to Earth millions of years ago to spread the poison of hatred, war, and catastrophe. They are with us still." And he connects everything through his research from the wars of ancient Egypt, the conquests of, like Ramses the Great or whatever, and even down to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And then concludes that this is the result of an alien presence on Earth, extraterrestrial visitors who conspired to dominate humankind. But again, the title of the book is The Gods of Eden. So even though he's calling them extraterrestrial, the book is titled Gods of Eden. How close was Bramley? And I guess for researchers who are still working today, guys like George Knapp, Jeremy Corbell, who are not really approaching this from a Christian perspective, how close are they to actually identifying the real enemy here?
They're fairly close. I mean, that's the thing, is that it's kind of like Anton LaVey when he talks about the New Agers. It's like they want to do all these works and they want to tap into his power, but they don't want to invoke his name and give him credit. And so pretty much running right along the same lines.
As we mentioned earlier, Jacques Vallée, who's another very well-known ufologist and a secular researcher who says that the activity, the behavior of these craft is more interdimensional than extraterrestrial or some kind of new physics, which again, from a Christian perspective, is like, yeah, you're speaking our language now.
There's a lady who just recently came out with a book. I can't think of her name right off the top of my head, but I'll send you the link to the video that I'm talking about, because she was just recently on Joe Rogan's podcast. She is in the know. She's worked along people like such Gary Nolan and some of those. So where I'm going with this. She actually is friends with Jacques Delay, has been to his house, and she said he took her into his study and showed her his study. He has an entire bookshelf. One bookshelf is nothing but books on angels. The other bookshelf is nothing but books on fallen angels. And here's another thing. In that interview, she's talking about how he is an admitted Rosicrucian. And not only was he a Rosicrucian, but so was J. Allen Hynek, both Rosicrucians. Very interesting.
That is very interesting, especially considering that Chris Pinto and Dr. Michael, gosh, why am I forgetting his last name? Dr. Future. It'll come to me. Anyway, they did the documentary Dark Clouds over Elberton and concluded that it was a Rosicrucian who erected the
Georgia Guidestones.
The Georgia Guidestones, which got blown up a couple of years ago. And boy, forgive me, Mike. I'm gonna look this up while we're talking because I want to make sure to give him credit where it's due.
But you know that Pastor Casper just did the video. Georgia Guidestones are falling down. That I helped him work on that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. He did share that with us. That was brilliant. Michael Bennett. Sorry, Michael Bennett. Dr. Michael Bennett. They did some amazing documentary work and detective work in figuring this out. But again, a Rosicrucian philosophy embodied in the Georgia Guidestones, which again are no more. But that's a very interesting aspect to all of this. Given that this is a supernatural phenomenon, and that this is a spiritual phenomenon from a Christian perspective, we're dealing with fallen angels, demons that are working some kind of long con on humanity. What is the goal here? I mean, why try to fool us this way instead of just, as Baudelaire wrote and adapted by Christopher Nolan into his film The Usual Suspects, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Why are they manifesting in this particular way?
Well, that's the thing, is they don't want people to think about this. They don't want people.
Yeah, Shawnee, I've got to admit, riding jet skis on waves, that does look like fun.
To know they don't even want. I mean, if you're not walking with the Lord, they're completely happy as a clam. They're moving and manipulating people like chess pieces, whether they realize it or not. And that's the thing, like the gentleman Bramley wrote in his book Gods of Eden, that they've been at this for a very long time. I mean, they've been here since the Garden of Eden, and they've been manipulating mankind. And even the book of Enoch, the fallen angels, it talks about the angels taught humanity warfare, taught them metallurgy and how to make weapons. So, I mean, they've obviously been deriving something out of this for a very long time. It's not just a hatred towards humanity. It has something to do with the human souls and people being damned to hell.
It's really been a change of strategy over the years, though, over the centuries, where they used to appear to humanity as the gods of the ancient world. And I know that the modern ancient astronauts or ancient aliens hypothesis kind of stands that on its head. The gods of Eden weren't actually supernatural beings. They were visitors from the planet Nibiru, and they were here to enslave humanity or create humanity as slaves. And the Sumerians had it all wrong. And now they're well, actually, I think I've answered my own question. It seems like that's exactly what they've done, where they appeared as gods in the ancient world, and now they're telling us, no. We are they, but we're just space travelers. You guys just had it all wrong. Your distant ancestors were too primitive to recognize spacemen when they saw them.
Yeah, and we know a lot of the same information because we both researched a lot of the same circles. And Peter Levenda, who wrote the book Sinister Forces, he gets into the whole thing about the Council of Nine, that Purich and several other people were making contact with this group of entities that refer to themselves as the Nine. And that's actually going to be the next film that I'm going to work on, is going to be on the Nine. So I'll be getting into that, and I'm going to show that there has been 9 gods that have ruled over every pantheon, every civilization, going back all the way back to Mesopotamia. Even the Mount Olympus, the 9 gods that ruled over Mount Olympus, the Ennead in Egypt, and so on. And you just keep seeing this 9. Yeah. So I mean, it's repetitive, but that's the thing is, I think Crowley summed it up best when he said, "I serve Lucifer and his Augustus Council of 9." So
same story over and over.
Exactly. And so yes, these gods were here, but you've gotten into this in your research. A lot of the books that you've written, you talk about this, that these are the same gods. They just have different names and different pantheons, different civilizations.
Yeah, and the 9 is something that Josh Peck and I wrote about in The Day the Earth Stands Still. It was surprising, and you mentioned Peter Levenda. Sharon and I highly recommend the Sinister Forces trilogy that he wrote. One of the books in the trilogy is called The 9 for that very reason. We joked during one of our interviews with Peter that his trilogy is sort of like the 6 Degrees of Charlie Manson, because everything seems to connect to Manson. And another researcher by the name of Dave McGowan, who wrote the book Programmed to Kill, which got into Manson and other serial killers of the 60s and 70s, like Henry Lee Lucas and others, who almost appeared to have been created by the government in certain programs. And when you start looking at the connections between guys like Manson and, for example, Scientology, and the Process Church of the Final Judgment connected to the Son of Sam and their connections to Scientology. And the way the Process Church, by the way, was rebranded as as an animal rights organization, sort of like the ASPCA. It's bizarre, but what used to be the Process Church of the Final Judgment, which came out of Scientology, connected to the Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, that's where President Biden got his 2 German Shepherd rescue dogs that keep biting Secret Service agents from what used to be the Process Church. I forget what their organization is called now, but I mean, when you start looking at these connections, and Levenda does a wonderful job in this trilogy.
And you also touched on the whole thing about McGowan. He also did the book Weird Science in the Laurel Canyon. He gets into this, as well as O'Neill, who wrote the book Chaos.
Yeah, Phil, being a hunter, put on some goggles, snorkel, flippers, grab a spear gun, go skin diving, and go and catch your dinner. It's really fun.
And I mean, that's the thing. It's like the guy that was the handler for Manson that you were talking about. He's the same person when after Ruby shot Oswald. They said that he was asking, "What happened? How did I get here?" Well, when he got sent to prison, the same guy who was the handler for Manson, and O'Neill talks about this in his book Chaos, he said he goes to visit Ruby in prison, and within 45 minutes of speaking to him alone, when he came out, he said he suffered a psychotic break, and he was never the same ever again after that. So you got to ask yourself, because every time Charles Manson used to get in trouble, this guy would show up and he would magically make everything just disappear, and Charlie would walk out of jail scot-free. And so, like I said, you need to read that book. You really do need to read that book.
Yeah, Sharon has read it, and in fact, we read something else. Speaking of Dave McGowan, and I know we're rabbit trailing away from your film Skinwalkers and Stranger Things of the Unseen Realm, but a lot of this stuff winds up interconnected, and it blows your mind when you start reading things like Levenda's Sinister Forces trilogy, and you see how the space program is connected to not just the Nazi research during World War II and things like the Nazi Bell and all of that, and Wernher von Braun, but the Kennedy assassination and the moon landings and Charles Manson and others. And the 9 coming back to this. This group of entities that.
Diane, the sun's for signs for the Gentiles, and the moon's for signs for the Jews. We're getting a solar eclipse. They're getting a blood moon, and there's a devil comet coming in between them. This is getting unbelievably stunning. Wow.
We're communicating telepathically with a group led by a CIA contractor named Andrea Puharich, with some of the wealthiest people from old money families like the Forbes and the Paynes and the Astors and the inventor of the Bell helicopter, and two of the people wound up taking in a young couple named Charles and Marina Oswald. Lee and Marina Oswald. Yes, Lee Harvey. So again, you've got this connection to CIA mind control projects and aliens from outer space saying we created you and we're back to put things right. And then, oh wait, no, we're actually the gods of ancient Egypt. Again, your head begins to explode.
And then Gene Roddenberry was one of those as well, and he was taking a lot of this information and writing this series called Star Trek that just kind of, has been.
As we're watching this, I've been going through and rewatching Deep Space Nine on the
non-Bajoran guys and the wormhole.
See, guys, they're agreeing with me. I think the Stargate series, they've already developed that technology, and these guys are saying the same about Star Trek and that. So, yeah, that's interesting.
Well, Deep Space Nine.
Right, exactly. So, Roddenberry was a member of this group that eventually included Uri Geller, who we mentioned in the earlier part of the program. So, this is all like so much that for somebody who's jumping into the deep end of the pool and seeing all this for the first time, and again, you pack a lot of this into the 2.5 hours of your documentary. Again, extremely well researched. What do you hope people will take away from this? I mean, going into this, never seeing any of this before, you can see all this and just, be blown back into your chair like that old Maxell tape commercial, where your hair gets blown back. How do you process it? It's almost overwhelming.
And that's one of the things that we've always had people tell us, whether it was Hollow Earth or it was higher entities.
Yeah.
Especially this one. I've had people give me feedback, and
just on your TV, Shawnee.
And I've had some say this is more academic type level stuff of what you're getting into, because you're showing how this is all interconnected, connecting all the dots. But it's one of those ones where you're not going to get everything out of it the first time you watch it. You're probably going to end up having to watch it close to 4 or 5 times, maybe more. Because like I said, I had to take 480 pages of notes and condense it down to 88 pages. And so, of course, I had to try to talk as fast as I could, but, make sure that I'm enunciating everything and to, that way people can pause it and they go look something up, verify and make sure. And so, like I said, I hope that people watch this and not only do they see how everything connects, but that this has all been, that they have initiated a lot of this by satanic ritual. And like I said, these places that are satanically charged, whether they're old, whatever things may have been going on in these geographic locations previously in the past, because that's another thing. Everybody talks about Skinwalker Ranch, but it's only one of multiple ranches out there in that area. In fact, there's one called Moonshadow, there's one called Blind Frog, there's Skinwalker, there's Stardust, there's did I say Bradshaw?
No, Bradshaw.
Okay, so yeah, Bradshaw. In fact, what is it? Goodness, I can't think of his name. The one that owned Bigelow. He not only owned Skinwalker Ranch, but he also owned Bradshaw Ranch. He bought them both at the same time and owned both of them for a decade. And Bradshaw is just as well known. Have you read the book called Merging Dimensions about Bradshaw Ranch? Yeah, you might want to check that one out, because everything that goes on at Skinwalker Ranch, it's all going on at this other ranch called Bradshaw Ranch.
Well, I think the good thing to remember when watching this, to paraphrase something that our friend Carl Gallup said after the election in 2020, at no point in history did the Lord slap himself on the forehead and say, boy, I didn't see that coming. So the one who spoke the universe into existence and has seen the end from the beginning has seen all of this stuff that the fallen realm is throwing at us, to get sand in our eyes and confuse us as to what's going on out there. So as long as we trust that God's got this under control, he's seen it, he's seen what they're trying to do. They're playing four-dimensional chess, but he's playing infinite dimensional chess. So we don't need to be afraid of any of these things. Yeah, disturbing, no question. Let's share this information just to, if nothing else, let people around us know that the fallen realm, these demons and their fallen angel progenitors, are seriously trying to destroy us and everything that we love. But we serve one who is far more powerful, and again has seen all of their activity in advance. Why do the nations rage and imagine a vain thing? He who sits in the heavens laughs; he holds them in derision. So I think we're all good on that score. Chad, just one final question: what was the most surprising or startling, stunning, shocking, disturbing thing that you came across in your research?
I would say probably that a lot of these people knew exactly what it was that they were dealing with, and that they were dealing with demonic and satanic entities. We had talked. You brought up Nick Redfern, his book Final Events. Well, me and you both know Ray Boucher. We met Ray Boucher. We know him. We talked to him. In fact, Ray sent me a lot of his documentation that he was sending to Linda Moulton Howe, things that he was receiving from these individuals that Nick referred to as the Collins elite, but that's not what they did not refer to themselves as that. That was the name that he gave to them, or a moniker, I should say. But they refer to themselves as, or Ray and them referred to them as the Riders. And like I said, they were taken aback by what they were witnessing and what they were seeing the U.S. government actively engaged in, and it shocked them to the core, because these men did look at life through a biblical lens, and they were beyond shocked with what they were seeing, that the U.S. government was actively engaging in.
But again, the U.S. government, not as great as the one who spoke the universe into creation, who, again, is not ever taken by surprise. So while those in government who may think they know what they're dealing with and know how to handle what is coming their way, the Lord and creator of all is already on top of the situation and has things well in hand. We just need to trust in him, and our futures will be secure. Maybe a rough ride between now and getting there, but the end will turn out all right. Chad Riley is the writer, director, narrator, host of the film Skinwalkers and Stranger Things of the Unseen Realm. It's available to stream right now in full HD at Vimeo. Is it 4K or just a full HD?
It's just full HD at 1080p.
Yeah. Well, I mean, streaming video, if you try to stream 4K, that can get a little. If you don't have the fastest internet connection, that can bog you down a little bit. I'll put a link in the notes below this video or audio, wherever you're watching or listening, and direct you to it. Highly recommended. Great production values, excellent research, and again, Chad, is basically, you've got a lot in here to process, and definitely.
Phil, if they'd done the Philadelphia experiment in 1942, where they made a ship go into another dimension and then come back, if they can do that in 42, imagine how far ahead they are now. What is it, 80 years later or something? So imagine the technology. I completely believe they got the Star Trek technology and the Stargate technology. I think they've really got that, and they've been to these planets. I think it's true.
Look forward to the next film about the Nine. That is a really fascinating bit of American history.
Hey, Voss, good to see you. Welcome back, mate.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting on that one. So that's why I'm hoping that this one does well, that we can get moved back to Alabama and see about getting a place where we can set up a base of operations where I can quickly get onto that must be Gracie over there, but quickly get into production on the other one once I get all my research collaborated. But it's
Well, let us know when that's out, and we will definitely have you back to talk about that. I'm not sure what she's seeing or hearing over there. She is
I think
kind of looking
she's
at
probably recommending. She might be recommending the film for everybody.
I think that's what it is. Yes. Chad Riley, thanks for joining us. We look forward to talking with you again soon.
Awesome. It was an honor to be here with you. Look forward to seeing you again soon, brother.
You'll find a link to the film Skinwalkers and Stranger Things by Chad Riley in the show notes, whether you're watching this at YouTube or listening to one of our many podcast outlets. Please take the time.
He must wear makeup because he looks a lot older there.
Get.
Oh, where was it? I had something lined up. Hang on, guys. That was it.
This is Kate, an accounting whiz. Numbers don't lie in account.
Understand that this is one of the second power in heaven texts that is describing the God of Israel. In this case, would be, in my opinion, the angel of the Lord. It's not, you're not to think of this in terms of God and his essence, and you're not to think of this in terms of the Father God. This is the battle of sons against sons. It's kind of the way that it always is in all the myths. The Baal cycle, it's Baal fighting Yam, and those are the two sons of El. And so this I think is really the main motif of the entire Old Testament. Whenever we find a divine warrior text, and there's lots of them, another one that comes to mind is Psalm 29. Huge divine warrior passage, and it's directed at is kind of a polemic or an attack against Baal himself. It's funny. I went to the Wikipedia like you did, Derek, for the war gods, and it did not say that Baal is a war god, and I was really surprised by that. And it also did not say that Marduk is a war god. And I was like, wow, because when you read the Baal cycle, the whole thing is about war. It's about Baal getting his victory over his beloved brother. That Yam is the beloved son of El, and it ticks Baal off so bad that he has to go and kill him. And then he ends up getting a house for himself because he becomes the victor. If that's not a warrior god, I don't know what is. Marduk, very similar in Babylon. The stories are highly similar. And there's a whole motif of the way that these things work, where you have a conflict, you have a victory, you have kingship, you have house building, you have a celebration, and you have a blessing. And this comes from a fellow named Timothy Gombis, and this hopefully will be the one that will most directly answer your question. Although I think these others also very directly do too. But he did his dissertation on Ephesians, and so when I preached Ephesians several years ago, I had 5 sermons in a row. Now this is Ephesians, New Testament. It's all about Jesus. And I had 5 sermons: the Divine Warrior 1, the King; the Divine Warrior Part 2, the Threat of the Zombie and the Triumph of the King; Divine Warrior Part 3, the Threat of the Law and the Triumph of Messiah; Divine Warrior Part 4, building his house; Divine Warrior Part 5, the Divine Warrior and Paul's imprisonment. And what Gamba shows is that the book of Ephesians, in those first 2 or 3 chapters, is following the exact same style and motif of these ancient war documents of these gods, where there's this conflict, there's this victory, he builds his house, and there's this celebration. Ephesians is doing this for who? For Jesus Christ.
Wow.
So, there's lots of different directions you can take the New Testament, some New Testament examples. You can take Jesus's victory in constant war and battle against Satan in the New Testament, especially in the Gospels, especially in books like Luke. You can go to this idea of 2 powers in heaven. You can understand that these texts are talking about Israel's God, there being the Son of God, especially, so that we're not somehow divorcing the New Testament from the Old. We're not divorcing and creating two different gods that we worship or something like that. This is so not the biblical narrative. I can't even tell you, but it is very much something that we've inherited for whatever reason, even in conservative, evangelical, and even some reform circles. I don't know why, but it is. So this question hits the mark, man, and I'm glad that they asked it because I think there's some really, really good answers to it.
Well, and I agree. I mean, we can't avoid the fact that the Hebrew phrase, Yahweh Sabaoth, Lord of hosts, is used about 260 times in the Old Testament. I mean, that literally means Lord of armies.
Right.
So, I mean, if you're following a deity who you call Lord of armies, you got to accept that he's got a martial nature of some sort. Then how do you reconcile that with, but we're still the good guys?
Yeah.
I think it is interesting that we see the, Brian, as you pointed out, some of the direct conflict with some of these other entities in Scripture. I mean, the parting of the Red Sea at a place called Baal Zephon. That's what started me down this whole rabbit trail about 7 years ago. Sharon and I stumbled on that in our weekly Bible study. It's like, wait a minute, was that always in there? Why is Baal in Egypt? I knew nothing about the Amorites or the Hyksos at that time, the rulers of northern Egypt during the time of the sojourn, at least the beginning of the Israelite sojourn in Egypt. But the fact is that Baal continued to be worshipped by the Egyptian pharaohs down to the time of Ramses the Great in the middle of the 13th century BC. So a lot of those Canaanite deities, like Resheph, the plague god, who was also depicted as a warrior, was worshipped.
That's a good pickup. It might be Baal doing that, Shawnee. That's a good pickup.
By the pharaohs. In fact, Dr. Doug Petrovich makes a really good case that Resheph, or that Amenhotep II, was the pharaoh of the Exodus and his personal protector god, because Resheph was believed to be a protector of chariot warriors, was the personal protector deity of Amenhotep, the pharaoh of the Exodus, protected by the plague god and protector of chariot warriors. Like, oh, okay. Well, how did Yahweh free his people? By destroying his chariots after a series of plagues.
So yeah, I think this is in the question that Doug was answering as well, but I think it addresses one of the primal questions that everyone has a hard time with. How can a loving God be engaged in all this violence and stuff?
Right.
I mean, this kind of takes it more down an apologetics angle. I don't want to dwell too much there because, for me, it's a matter of, well, I don't have to justify God or reinterpret him to fit my soft Western paradigm of, violence is bad or something. I have to see, well, what is God like and understand and accept him on his terms and change my theology to match that. So when I see things like what Doug was referring to, the angel of Yahweh all throughout the Old Testament, I mean, he slaughters, what is it, tens of thousands of Assyrians, and this is the angel of Yahweh, and a study of that is very clearly it's Jesus. And now there's a difference theologically because we would argue that the human incarnation of Jesus as Messiah had a very specific purpose of peacefully and innocently being killed, obviously for the atonement of sins, etc. So his personal mission on earth in the physical human incarnation was peaceful, but that is a very specific calling and theological threadline that God was achieving his purposes. But that same Jesus, when he is not incarnate as a human, because this is before he's been born, right? The angel of Yahweh, before that, as a different form of God on earth, however you want to figure that out is fine, but I don't understand it. But so he clearly can be that violent warrior that people don't like. And yeah, people can think that's an argument against our God or something, as if the creator of the universe is not allowed to go ahead and destroy everything he makes, like as if that makes him bad. See, I don't have the problem that a lot of people have because I have the understanding that whatever God creates, he can do whatever he wants with it. He can destroy it. He can use a vessel for good or a vessel for evil. He can do whatever he wants. But I realize that is the, yeah, exactly. His game is rules. And I think all of us in this context, I think it's important for us to get on to more interesting things because we all understand God that way. We don't need to try to defend God. But I do think it helps Christians to face that fact because Christians have been infected by that notion that God is not a warrior. Mm-hmm. And the fact is, he is. Yeah. And, one of the things that we've started talking about is Baal, and there's this Baal is the Canaanite god, and that's the land that the Israelites were going into. And so he's probably the number one foe throughout, most of the text there. And Baal was a storm god. And the war gods were often storm gods. And there's several elements to the Baal identity that the Old Testament writers assume onto Yahweh. And again, from our perspective, they're basically saying,
I knew Baal was a storm god because he shows up in my OSD code, so I looked him up and seen who he was. And that's how I knew he was a storm god.
Baal's not the storm god or whatever. Yahweh is. So they're using the same language, but there's several motifs. One is Baal is a cloud rider, and in the Baal epic, there's many references to he rides the clouds. What does this mean? On his chariots, and that's basically a notion of judgment. And the other thing is he's a storm god and he rides the clouds, and he.
Hi Lucerio, welcome to the channel. Oh, welcome back to the channel.
Basically uses armies of people as his means of judgment, and we see these same three elements, I would argue, in Yahweh. When Yahweh is described over and over as the cloud rider. And what does that mean? Well, if you look at those passages, you'll see that they're always, Yahweh comes on the clouds and he's coming in judgment, whether it's against Israel or against Egypt or Syria, that terminology is used. So he rides the clouds. And, just one classic example, I think, is Jeremiah 4. Jeremiah is a prophet of the exile, and he's talking about how Babylon is going to come against Israel. And he says, Jeremiah 4, behold, he comes like the clouds, his chariots like the whirlwind. And in Isaiah, it talks about God rides a swift cloud. But it says in verse 16, warn the nations, he is coming. And that in context, that's Yahweh. Yep. Yahweh is coming, announced to Jerusalem.
Yep, straight to heaven for us, Lucifer, you're right. Most of us here wear post-tribbers. Yeah, we've checked it out a bit, but we basically fall in the post-tribulation. Couple go for pre.
Besiegers come from a distant land. And, we don't have time to exegete the whole passage. So the idea here is talking about the besiegers are the Babylonian armies. But it's saying Yahweh is coming on the clouds. Yahweh is coming. Then the Babylonian besiegers. So there's an
yeah, thanks for the spoiler alert, Lucifer.
Equivalency there that's saying, and again, this is one passage is out of many. We've got it in Ezekiel, we've got it all over the place. Yeah. But it's this notion that God is a God.
Okay, Lucifer, I think there's good arguments for pre-trib, mid-trib, but I lean more towards post-trib. Be great if it happened on the big solar eclipse, which is everyone's hoping for. But read the Bible and it says at Armageddon we get rescued.
Out of war, he comes on the clouds in judgment against a people and city or whatever. And in this case, it's against Israel. But he also does it against Nineveh. He also does it against Babylon. He comes in the clouds in judgment, and he does it through foreign armies. Literally, like Isaiah 10 talks about, the king of Assyria is the axe in my hand. And the hand is the literal action. This isn't a, Weasley Christian little, God allows it. No, it's God's doing it. That's the text. And he's doing it through the armies, foreign armies. And so he's judging, for instance, Israel.
Okay, that's a good argument. Wow, that's a good argument. What did he just say? I lost track of thought.
Hand. and the hand is the literal action. This isn't a, Weasley Christian little, oh, God allows it. No, it's God's doing it. That's
that's it. God allows it, and he says, no, God's doing it. Like God allows Biden, but he's doing it.
It's the text. And he's doing it through the armies, foreign armies. And so he's judging, for instance, Israel in 586 when he went into exile, right? He's judging Israel by destroying that temple, by taking them out through the armies. The Babylonian armies are God coming in judgment. God's using them for his purposes, in other words,
Mm-hmm.
So that's a motif that just stretches throughout the whole Old Testament, particularly exilic literature, because that's where you've got Babylon and Assyria and all these nations coming against each other. But that to me is one of the most, fascinating elements of this divine warrior motif, which I would argue, no matter what interpretation you have of Jesus coming on the clouds, you can see that there's a precedent in the Old Testament to help flesh that out and give it more meaning.
I have a question I would like to ask all three of you guys, because I don't know the answer to it, because the war gods themselves are not my expertise at all. But just hearing Brian talk, thinking about Jesus and God in the Old Testament, same thing, and yet God is bigger than Jesus because it's also Father and Spirit. When God comes as the divine warrior in Scripture, he's coming as the warrior who is judging sin and rebellion. He's coming in righteousness, to bring righteousness, to bring back truth, to punish evil. Like that is what it's only about. He's never vindictive just because he wants to be sadistic or something like that. That's not it. I mean, there's a famous quote that one of the four horsemen, atheist horsemen of the apocalypse, gives, Richard Dawkins, where he has this long strewn out list of adjectives of God being the sadistic, masochistic, blah, 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 blah. And that's why he can't believe in it. Well, that's not the biblical picture of why the divine warrior comes ever. Like ever. One other thing before I get to the question, which is Jesus, when he is a warrior in the New Testament, but he's not judging and coming against humanity. He's judging and coming against the evil powers, because he's going to bring a kingdom, that's a spiritual kingdom, to this earth. Later he will come and judge humanity when the last day comes. Up until then, it's kind of like we get a reprieve to some degree. Doesn't mean he's not still judging nations and causing them to rise and fall, but specifically when it comes to the law and the gospel, their purpose is to bring salvation. And so I like what Brian said about that Jesus had a very specific reason for coming in the flesh, and it doesn't contradict who he is in his essence as the divine warrior. And he is fighting, but he isn't coming to fight the way a lot of people think. So it gets to my question, which is this: do the gods of the nations, when they are depicted as these warrior gods, are they coming to judge sin and to bring in righteousness, or is it more capricious than that? Is it selfish? Is it egotistic? Is it narcissistic? Is it all these kinds of things? How would you?
Gee, I like that word, capricious. That's a good word.
Describe or compare the divine warrior Yahweh to these other warrior
I think
gods.
you've hit on something. In fact, you took the words right out of my mouth. Caprice. If you compare the motives of Yahweh as a warrior God, as the ultimate warrior God, representing that divine kingship, that divine order, and it draws a sharp line in juxtaposition against the gods of the nations and these specifically, but not exclusively, these so-called gods of war. But it goes back to the comments that I made at the beginning of our discussion, that what the demonic does, it takes this proper, good, righteous, perfect, and just order in terms of, as Sharon would say, theopolitics, takes that and turns it on its head. And that's why we have all these despotic rulers and kingdoms that litter history, and the same with the gods that were over. In this case, war gods that we're talking about tonight. The same with those gods that were over these kingdoms, and so it is very selfish and capricious, and their motives are very base and agenda driven. So I would say that there's a sharp contrast between the gods of the nations for whatever their motives and interests are, and that's something that we talked about on this program before as well. They don't align with Yahweh because they're in one way, shape, or form they've been in rebellion against Yahweh, and so their motives are completely removed from God as the divine warrior.
That's something the skeptics like to ignore, the fact that these entities of the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, all of the other pantheons are often depicted as acting like humans except with superpowers. The same kind of frailties and follies.
Lucifer, if you were Christian, if you were really Christian, you would not have that name. Let's be honest here. If you were real, yeah, I made my point.
And lusts and jealousies and angers and so on. It's just that they've got, the power to literally split the earth or send lightning bolts from heaven to back up whatever their human emotions are. I mean,
as Lucifer's using lightning bolts.
The story of Gilgamesh rejecting Inanna, the goddess of sex and war, sex and violence, really. She gets so upset, she goes to the sky god Anu and demands that he release the bull of heaven to destroy his entire city because he turned her down. So that is not Yahweh. Besides the fact that Yahweh pre-existed all things, and all of the deities worshipped by the pagans had a mother and a father. So fundamental differences that the skeptics like to overlook.
Yeah, and yet, I mean, I have no shame in saying, I think the primary distinction is God says he's a jealous God, meaning, what does that mean? Is that a sin? No, jealousy means that there's a priority of, or an ultimacy of commitment over everything else. And so if you don't worship Yahweh as he deserves, he will judge you, and so there's that component to it that I think, which is why if you look throughout the Old Testament, he's mostly dealing with Israel. He does judge other Gentile nations, but his dealings is with Israel, and it's all about the relationship, the idolatrous relationship that Israel has that causes him to react in that way. And we understand that this kind of jealousy is not inherently sinful.
Right.
Because just look at marriage. Well, when you commit in marriage, you're committing to that one person. So if you're violating your oath to that person, that's a justifiable jealousy, which is why we have laws related to that, right? And so that's how God is with his creation, and if we worship him or not. But the other thing is that Jesus, and I did this in my novel, Jesus Triumphant, because I just thought it would be so wild and Christians would have a hard time with it, is it's already been brought up about the spiritual warfare that's going on, Christ and the powers. And we've, of course, talked about this extensively as well. But there's this.
Okay, Lucifer. See you later, mate.
Notion of spiritual warfare that is very much in the text. And again, we may have, I'm not sure what differing, interpretations we all have.
Shawnee, I didn't even bother looking it up, to be honest.
on this show related to this, but one of my favorite passages is Colossians 2:15, and that is where it says it's talking about Christ dying on the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities, that's these principalities and powers, and he put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. And the notion that I see there is that Christ's death and
yeah, that's what they do. They reply to your questions with irrelevant information.
Resurrection and ultimately ascension into heaven as king, but his death and resurrection was actually disarming them. And this language of triumph, which is also used elsewhere in the New Testament, of the spirit related to spiritual powers, the Roman triumph in particular, but there are other, throughout history they've had triumphs, but Rome had it, particularized, and the triumph was where the king that defeats a city would take the leaders mostly of the the loser. And dead or alive, they would, and particularly in Rome, they would bring them to Rome and drag them through the streets, wheel them on carts, dead or alive, bring them up to the capital Jupiter, I don't know, Capitoline Jupiter or something, and they would sacrifice them there, you know. And that was the expression to the people of Rome, you know, Caesar is still king, and to the defeated peoples, it was their rubbing their noses in their defeat and their loss, right? And so when it talks about Jesus disarming and, you know, triumphing over in them, that's the picture you get also in Ephesians, you know, where it's, you know, he brings his captives in triumph. It's like he's dragging those gods of the nations through the streets in triumph. That's military. And so I actually tried to deal with that issue, you know, in the Jesus triumphant, where, and some Christians like reacted like, Jesus was peaceful, but this is after he resurrected, right? You know, and I'm like, well, yeah, but this is what the Bible says spiritually in the spiritual realm. He did that to the spiritual powers, and what that might look like, I don't know, but I tried to depict it, you know. And but it's a wild image if you think about it, but it's clearly there theologically, Christ having that victory over the powers in a military concept to triumph, you know.
And
Brian,
I'm glad you brought up
this is
Ephesians
crazy.
4.
I just came across this week at preaching through the crucifixion scene in Luke and Mark, especially Mark. So these all overlap. But there's been really good arguments made that the whole scene, starting with Simon of Cyrene carrying the crossbar, all the way going to the cross, to the two guys that are nailed next to Jesus being offered wine that he refuses to take, to the mocking, that what they're arguing is that the Gospels are writing this very story as a kind of anti-subversive Roman triumph.
Yeah, Diane, with a name like that, what does he expect? Exactly.
Thing. So that Jesus actually does end up triumphing, but doing it exactly the opposite way is what always happens in Rome. It's really, I was like, cool. That's so crazy.
That is cool. But I'm glad you brought up that reference to Ephesians 4, Brian, because I wanted to jump to Psalm 68, because that's a very clear depiction. Psalm 68 is what Paul quoted in Ephesians 4.
Okay, the guy on the bottom left, he looks like Tarantino, that director. What's his name? Terrence Tarantino, I think. You look at him, he looks like him.
Beginning at verse 15, O mountain of God, mountain of Bashan. And as Mike Heiser pointed out, that phrase in Psalm 68:15, O mountain of God, Har Elohim, probably means, because it's referring to Mount Hermon, probably should be translated mountain of God's, mountain of Bashan, because the mountain of God is Zion, not Hermon. Mountain of God's, mountain of Bashan, O many-peaked mountain, mountain of Bashan. Why do you look with hatred, O many-peaked mountain, at the mount that God desired for his abode? Yes, where Yahweh will dwell forever. The chariots of God are twice 10,000. Thousands upon thousands. The Lord is among them. Sinai is now in the sanctuary. Another translation, the New English translation, renders it, he marches forth from Sinai in splendor. It's a difficult passage. You ascended on high, leading a host of captives in your train. And that's what Paul quoted. But when you go down to Psalm 68, verse 22, this is really interesting. And this may go back to a pre-Adamic conflict between Yahweh and Leviathan. The Lord said, I will bring them back from Bashan. I will bring them back from the depths of the sea. But a scholar, Dr. Nicholas Wyatt, says that is more likely properly translated, from Bashan I shall bring back from the depths, Yam, which is the Hebrew word for sea, but it's also the Canaanite name of their chaos dragon, Leviathan.
Okay.
So from Bashan I shall bring back chaos, Leviathan. So here we've got this psalm that is depicting Mount Hermon as a sort of enemy camp. A Canaanite Olympus is how one scholar, Edward Lipinski, described it. Angry at the mountain that God chose for his abode, Zion, and then God apparently leading heavenly chariots against this Canaanite Olympus and leading captives away.
Sort of following up on that, a couple of episodes ago, I referenced Jesus' fulfillment of the Genesis 3:15 prophecy by literally walking around that area, in Bashan and parts of Upper Galilee at the foot of Mount Hermon. He's fulfilling that because Doug and I have been on this crazy journey working on this Serpent Mound book. Jesus is literally crushing the head of the serpent with every step that he takes in this land. If that's not military action, if it's not mocking Baal and Marduk and Zeus and every one of these kingly warrior gods that is supposedly defeated the chaos dragon and the serpent, I don't know. That, to me, that seems awfully militaristic.
Well, then you've got Psalm 74, verse 12. Yet God, my King, is from of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. You divided the sea, you divided Yam, you divided the Canaanite chaos monster by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monsters on the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness, which would seem to...
He knows Lucifer fell from heaven. Didn't you see his lightning bolt emojis? That's what he was doing, lightning bolt emojis.
To be a reference to the Enuma Elish, where Marduk defeated Tiamat, their chaos dragon, split the body, and created all of the known creation from the body of the chaos dragon.
We made the argument a while ago, I think, on this program, Derek, and I know I've talked to all of you guys about this, that when Jesus feeds the 5,000, that there's a really good chance that it's the very same place that you believe that the baptism was, just north of the Sea of Galilee, by the second wheel of giants that we got to visit, and that they discovered there two hieroglyphs, and one was a fish and one was a serpent. And so the idea of being there, and you have to go back to the Targum of Psalm 23 to really see this. Of course, Psalm 23 is the famous, the Lord is my shepherd psalm. But there you have in the Targum that you're feeding and feasting upon Leviathan. And so the idea seems very plausible that Jesus, in feeding the 5,000 people there, is actually doing the very thing that you're talking about, with kind of a military banquet victory with these people who don't even have the foggiest idea what's going on.
Let me throw another one in here, because this one was only I only stumbled onto this by looking at the New English translation, which we love to look at because the translators very kindly published all of their notes as to why they chose what they did. Psalm 82 is that famous courtroom scene in heaven, of course. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. The Net Bible translate that phrase, translated in the ESV, divine council, it's Adat El in the Hebrew. So the Net Bible translates it, God stands in the assembly of El. And translators chose to do that because they argued that this may refer to, this may be a polemic where the God of Israel, Yahweh, basically appears in the middle of the council of the enemy and condemns them for judging unjustly these humans who don't have any understanding, don't have any knowledge, give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. And because they weren't doing that, Yahweh decrees a death sentence on all of these on these rival gods.
I haven't heard that one.
The divine council, divine council, I mean, is an interesting enough concept as it is. It's like a courtroom scene in heaven with Yahweh presiding over the court. And I'm okay with that interpretation. But if it is, in fact, he appears in the assembly of El, man, it's like God shows up in the midst of the rebels.
That.
Exactly. Yeah. Huh. And if so, did that happen in Psalm 68? Or did it happen when Jesus went to Caesarea Philippi?
Well, there's certainly different components at different points of Christ's ministry, all the way to his death and resurrection. That these all sort of reflect these different. I don't know if we can nail it down as a historically, this is when events occurred, but it's certainly all part of the theological package, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. You brought up Psalm 68 and Ephesians 4, and Gondis in that dissertation, from what I remember, this was 5-6 years ago now, but he kind of stops his divine warrior idea. At least I did in my sermon, so I assume he does, and maybe chapter 2 or 3. But you're continuing right on into chapter 4. If the whole thing up to that point has been about the divine warrior, why in the world would those 2 verses not continue that theme? And especially when you go, I mean, it goes to the end of the book, doesn't it?
That damn typo. Have you heard about them sounds that are going off around the world? People are recording like horns going off in the air all over the world. So I'm thinking maybe it's the trumpets.
Because in chapter 6, what are we doing? Now we are picking up the weapons of our warfare, and we're trying to understand in light of his warfare what it is that we fight. Not against flesh and blood.
Okay.
So the whole book of Ephesians is about this, and people, to open somebody's eyes to that for the first time is pretty exciting thing to do.
Yeah, because a lot of people just get stuck in that verse in Ephesians 5 where it says, "Wait, women should submit to their husbands." Forget them out.
Yeah.
Again, Brian, you alluded to this. It's the habit that we have in the modern church with our Western 21st century sensibilities of wanting a God who lives up to our standards.
Yeah. And I've fallen victim to that as well. And so I understand the temptation,
But the idea of a warrior leading his people forth is not uncommon among.
Wow, 1,000 per day now die. There's going to be a big one hitting soon. Wow.
Bible scholars and the idea that the Lord, when he marched out from Sinai, in fact, the Song of Deborah in Judges chapter 5, where she says, Yahweh, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens dropped. Yes, the clouds dropped water. Okay, he's really the weather god, the storm god, not.
Oh, you mean Blue Beam? Okay, boss, I get you.
Not Baal. But then you got that interesting verse in Judges 5, verse 20. This is recounting the war the battle between Barak and the Canaanites. From heaven, the stars fought. From their courses, they fought against Sisera. So was there more going on there? Were there some heavenly chariots involved in that conflict? The chariots that went out in front of the army of Israel against the Syrians. So, this is not an uncommon theme in Scripture.
I think it would be important, too, though, for us to also make another nuanced distinction and to remind people that, the holy wars of Yahweh, that is taking over Canaan, that is also a very historically rooted, anchored concept that I would argue is not relevant to today. In other words, even in the Old Testament, there was a difference between war, and there was just wars in terms of wars of defense, how to treat people. Don't God give even directions, don't scorch the whole land, this kind of thing. But that had to do with normal war activity because evil people are going to try to kill you, so you have to defend yourself. That's a normal, acceptable concept. But that's even different from the holy wars and the holy wars of Joshua and such. Those are the passages where a lot of people will go to as examples of their problems, and then also accuse Christians. So this is what you think you want to do today? You Christians are violent and stuff. And there is a distinction between Christianity in that Christianity is not, it is the fulfillment of the Old Testament Judaism in Messiah, Jesus, but there is, because of Messiah coming, there's a transformation, and that old covenant, package of the land and conquering the people for the land, etc. It's been done away with in Christ, because now all the nations, all the Gentile nations are now freed and can come into the kingdom of God in a way they couldn't in the Old Testament. And there was a more of a violent takeover in the Bronze Age world or what have you. But what I'm saying is there's no shame in saying that is no longer applicable. We do not claim the holy wars, and so that was very specifically related to certain things that have a whole theological background, right? The Nephilim and the giants, but but we're not saying that. We don't claim that. And it's not contradictory or anything because it's very much rooted in that. But when Christ comes, he has that ultimate victory in the spiritual realm that then frees the whole earth is now, Jesus is king over all the earth. And there's no longer this distinction between, or shall we say, it's not just God's people and everybody else who are evil, but now men and women from every tribe, every tongue, and every nation can come into the kingdom of God. And so therefore we are a peaceful faith in that we propagate through the proclamation of the gospel, not through the sword like Islam does. Mm-hmm. But again, I have no problem admitting that there was the sword in that specific time period, but you have to understand it in its context, which is something the left is always trying. When it's trying to defend itself, it's okay to appeal to context. So, but we can't do that ourselves. No, well, we can, and it makes a difference.
Yeah, the same people that are warmongering all over
right
the world. Now. Yeah, everywhere you go, we must have more and more wars. We must have more wars. Must. The same people that stood standing up in the 60s saying, we've got to have some peace here. What's going on? Now these are the same people that are, we must have more. Total warmongering.
It's the incarnation of the Hegelian dialectic.
It absolutely is. Absolutely is. But, Brian, you're right. Ultimately, this war is against the spirit realm. And I suggest that Isaiah 24 captures that. It's a prophecy of that day. Isaiah 24, beginning of verse 21. On that day, which is the day of Yahweh, the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven and the kings of the earth on the earth. They will be gathered together as prisoners in a pit. They will be shut up in a prison, and after many days they will be punished. Then the moon will be confounded and the sun ashamed. And I would suggest that given the popularity of the sun and the moon as deities for the pagans in the ancient world, that was also a polemic against their pantheons. So I think that there is more to that prophetic utterance of Isaiah than would appear. I don't think he's just being picturesque in his language.
Well, I mean, in fact, throughout all the prophecies in the Old Testament, whether it's Babylon or Israel or Edom, all their historical judgments, they use that same collapsing universe imagery. Sky rolled up like a scroll, moon turning to blood. All that stuff was, again, symbolism of the supernatural principalities and powers and the earthly powers. The powers that be are falling, and that's a very beautiful, I think, poetic way of describing it. But I do think there is a supernatural connection to it because the host of heaven, that's what they worshiped, right? So it makes sense that the host of heaven would fall, when nations are being conquered or something.
I think you can put a little bit of flesh to what you're saying. I think about Daniel 10, because that's where we get kind of the two mentions of these princes of the nations, the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece. Well, what's the context in which that comes? Well, Daniel's praying and he wants an answer to his prayer. And for whatever reason, God dispatches Gabriel, but he says, sorry, man, I know that you thought that God wasn't listening to you, but I was kind of delayed for 3 weeks because I was fighting against the Prince of Persia. What? That's a war. It's turf wars. This is literally divine council stuff taking place right in front of us. The turf wars happening, and the fact that Derek brought up Psalm 82 earlier. Well, that the very last verse of Psalm 82 is exactly what Brian was just saying. Arise, O God, you will inherit all the nations. The promise given in Psalm 2 is now a sealed deal. And the whole point of Jesus coming is that this is how this is fulfilled. Not his second coming, his first coming. That's when this is fulfilled. That's when this opens up. Pentecost is the proof of it. People are being saved from every nation under heaven. And this is the reason why Christianity was mistaken to do these holy wars that they did during the Crusades or whatever, which I would argue there was a lot of self-defense going on in there to
absolutely
help them a little bit. It's not like totally they were evil, but I do think that there was some confusion going on of what you're saying, that this is, this is what the New Testament teaches us. And it's, if you don't understand the spiritual component of this, then you can take it in so many weird directions and in dangerous directions.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, there's a lot more in it. I love the book of Daniel because of his reference to the Watchers in chapter 4, in the parallel verse in the reference to the Watchers who come down and decree the punishment on Nebuchadnezzar for his pride. There's another phrase that's used in the Aramaic as Kedushin, the holy ones.
Mm-hmm.
So this decree is by the decree of the Watchers, the judgment by the holy ones. So the holy ones, that phrase there, referring to the Watchers. Then when you go to Daniel 7 and the little horn on that fourth beast that Daniel prophesied, which most scholars of end times prophecy will connect with the Antichrist figure. I think what's really interesting is that that verse, as I look, the horn made war with the saints. That's that same word, Kedushin, and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given for the Kedushin, the saints of the Most High. I think this is war in the heavenlies. We see the word saint in English and we assume that we know what it means, that it's referring to righteous people who are following God. But that's not how Daniel used it back in chapter 4. So this may indicate, again, more war taking place.
Well, and there's another
between God and his.
There's another nuance to those passages in Daniel too. The word used there for angel and watcher, both in Hebrew and then the Aramaic, Erim and Erim, also means cities, which brings us back to the sort of the territorial empire building, fallen, despotic city state that we started with tonight. And so there, you could take this so many different directions if you don't look at the context and the nuance of the language that's being used. But again, when we just let the words say what they say in context, then we begin to pick up on the nuance.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to get away from the warlike territorial nature of the gods of the nations when looking at a word like ego.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, not every use of that word in the Old Testament, obviously. Sometimes a city is just a city, but there are a couple of places like Isaiah 14. In fact, we put this on the cover of our book Veneration because we think this is what this means. This is a condemnation of the divine rebel in Isaiah 14. Prepare slaughter for his sons because of the guilt of their fathers, lest they rise and possess the earth and fill the face of the world with cities or watchers. So, yeah, it is. I would argue for the other argument in the other interpretation and context, but I could do and have done an entire hour just by myself on Isaiah 14.
I got one more question
with the understanding of the omission, by the way, that I'm not aware of any other scholars who are with us in that interpretation. So we could just be out on the limb sawing it off behind us there, Sharon and me. So anyway.
I got another question for you guys. It's a question about male deities of war versus female deities of war, goddesses.
Oh.
And I know, Brian, what you do with, at least for the sake of the novel, with the female and male, which is really an interesting idea. But you have Mars, Ares is the war god, but then you also have Asherah, Isis, that whole thing. So what do you guys make of these female warrior deities in respect to the male warrior deities?
Gender confusion.
They believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah,
exactly.
Except it's
There's your diversity and equity.
Yeah, die.
I thought I would get more than like a 2-second sarcastic answer, but okay.
No, actually, I think, sure.
Vast, what you see on them chemtrails, they'll be walking the streets soon, literally walking the streets.
And Sharon especially has argued that Inanna, Ishtar, Astarte, Aphrodite, Venus, and probably others, she's probably also manifests as Artemis, is really, really important even to this day. She is the same entity who is known as Queen of Heaven in Scripture. She is also called Queen of Heaven today, although I know, not to step on the toes of Roman Catholics, Mary is not the Queen of Heaven. And this
Take
is
the
not me.
sheep that's wearing it, Catholics.
And this is not me making this up. There are secular scholars that say yes, this worship was syncretized into the Roman Catholic Church. Sadly, but what's really bizarre is that Ishtar, Inanna, the Hurrian version of her, Shauska, really illustrates this. There's a very famous series of inscriptions, carvings of the deities of the Hurrian pantheon. They were the people of Indo-European, probably lived in the northern part of Mesopotamia in what is now like the Kurdish regions, basically of Syria, Iraq, Turkey, Iran. In Turkey, there's like all of the deities of the Hurrians in this cavern. And on one wall, it's all the male deities, and on the other wall, it's all the female deities. And Shauska, the Hurrian version of Inanna Ishtar, is on both walls because she was, even as far back as ancient Sumer, was depicted as both.
Yeah.
I am a young woman,
that's right.
but when I sit in the alehouse or the tavern, I am also an exuberant young man.
Yeah.
And her followers would praise her. There are Sumerian hymns that praise her for changing men into women and women into men. So this is a very old thing. By the time of the Canaanite,
So Brian wasn't just
pantheon,
kind of making it up for the sake of the novel.
he was not.
Yeah,
He was
did
not.
his homework.
Astarte was the representation, was represented by Venus as the evening star, but as the morning star, Athtar, the war god, who by the time of Muhammad in the 7th century AD, Athtar, even though he wasn't the head of the pantheon for any of the tribes of Arabia, and they would all have their own pantheon, and if one tribe beat another one in battle, they would adopt the god of the other tribe because clearly that god is more powerful than our god. But the only god that was worshipped by all of the Arabian tribes was Athtar, the war god. Now, the Moabite stone, King Mesha of Moab, who was defeated in battle by Jehoshaphat and a coalition of Edomites and the Israelites came down with Jehoshaphat. Mesha is the one who slaughtered his son on the wall. And by the way, there are Egyptian inscriptions showing Canaanites in a besieged city doing this. So this is not, the biblical authors making this up to make the Canaanites and Moabites look bad. He praised his god Chemosh, who was a war god. He was equated by the later Greeks with Ares, but he called him Chemosh Athtar. In other words, two names. Yeah, so Athtar was connected to Chemosh somehow. So now you got this weird thing. It's like, okay, wait a minute. If that's Astarte and Athtar, and is connected though to Chemosh, who was Ares, and Ares had a thing with Aphrodite, and I mean that way lies madness. But I think this entity is so powerful. Sharon explained it once. I think a brilliant illustration. It's like finger puppets. Okay, you got one hand and you got multiple finger puppets manifesting in our realm, depending on the culture that they need to impress. So that way you may have Aphrodite and Artemis and perhaps Athena and perhaps a couple of other entities in the Greek pantheon, all being the same deity entity in the spirit realm.
Something, Derek, that you just mentioned jogged my memory too. The concept was whenever they, we've talked about this before, how images would do the calling down of the breath of the gods into the images, and so they didn't believe the images were the gods. They believed they housed or resided within those images. But nonetheless, when cities were defeated, they would often do that triumphal march, but they would do it with the deity, and that would show that the ancient Near East certainly saw that as being we've conquered the god, which is why when the Dagon statue falls, and hands are destroyed on the Dagon statue, that's Yahweh sort of saying the same thing back. But I was thinking it also is why the Philistines, they stole the ark, because the ark the ark represented the presence of Yahweh for sure, but by them taking that they thought they were taking the image of the god and having control over it. And then of course God smote them with plague and stuff. But nonetheless, that's what's going on there. That notion that when they take the image of the god, they've conquered the god, and it even came into play.
Yeah, Phil, I'll use creek water if I have to. You just got to boil it, and then it's okay.
in the lives of the Israelites as well.
I started laughing when you mentioned that because it just so happens that I'm wearing my Dagan Fish and Chip Shack T-shirt.
You gotta be kidding me.
Authentic Mesopotamian cuisine since 2500 BC. Our good friend Von Glitchka developed that for us. I said, I need that on a shirt. So
That's hilarious.
Well, the bottom line is spiritual warfare is more than just a phrase. As our friend Carl Gallups once said, it's a little more than just praying for the willpower to resist that second bowl of vanilla ice cream. Well, until we're part of it, until we are brought back into that realm, like the prodigal son welcomed home. So hopefully for viewers out there or listeners that there is a little bit of clarity, a little more perhaps understanding as to why these disturbing images that we most of us haven't been taught how to reconcile with the idea of Jesus as a kind, loving, forgiving, tolerant, inclusive guy. Jesus is my homeboy, Jesus is my boyfriend sort of depiction that the modern church often gives us. He has been waging war against these entities for literally millennia. And I love the way Doug, you and Brian put it. It's sort of a reversal of the Roman triumph. And what's so awesome about it is that Jesus fooled them into helping him fulfill that mission.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep.
So, well, Brian Godawa, Godawa.com, Dr. Judd Burton, BurtonBeyond.net, Pastor Doug Van Dorn, Douglas Van Dorn. Is it com or net, Doug?
Com.
Okay. Yeah, it's you got to sit on those URLs, otherwise you get people will steal those out from underneath
snap
you.
them up within about 5 minutes.
DouglasVanDorn.com. Yeah. Judd and Doug, Brian, we're still working on you. We hope you'll join us for the Iron and Myth Israel tour next March. But until then, next month, and we look forward to doing this again. Check the show notes at vftv.net.
Okay, guys, I'm out.
Consuming this
God bless.
for links to the websites of Pastor Doug Van Dorn, Brian Godawa, and Dr. Judd